Alright, let's play a game of what if. I think we all know by now that the New World Order angle pretty much made WCW in the late 90s. It was their golden ticket. But sometimes it felt like the faction had no real direction and every week felt the same as the last. Makes you wonder, what could WCW have done differently? What would happen if certain storylines within the nWo arc had a different outcome? Well, today we're venturing into bizarro timelines where some key nWo angles played out differently. As we go through each timeline, I'll pitch what might have happened, explain why it actually makes sense in context, and I'll also toss a question or two your way to get debate going or to explain why it probably wouldn't have worked. Do keep in mind, I've never done a fantasy booking video before, so I've no real idea what format you guys expect, so I hope this is okay. And also, everything here's make-believe. I know certain things couldn't have happened and the butterfly effect would have led to other things not happening and what have you, but I'm just daydreaming in this video. No need to get super factual, it's just for funsies. Sound good? Alright then, let's get underway. In this alternate timeline, it isn't Hulk Hogan who gets revealed as the third member of the nWo at Bash at the Beach, it's Sting. The Stinger turns on Lex and Savage during the hostile takeover match, he puts Randy in the Scorpion Deathlock, and Sting cuts a promo afterwards talking about how he's fed up with being underappreciated. The ultimate WCW loyalist becomes the ultimate traitor, the franchise of WCW sells his soul to the outsiders, and the company is never the same again. Turning Sting heel would have sent shockwaves through WCW. Fans grew up on Sting being the perfect white meat babyface, so having him align with Hall and Nash gives the nWo instant credibility. The turn would have hurt all the little Stingers, it would have hurt long-time WCW fans, and it would make you want to see what happens next. Hogan's heel turn worked brilliantly because it brought in both WCW and WWF audiences. Hogan was a household name whom WCW fans had grown tired of, and WWF fans were curious to see him as a bad guy. Sting's turn, by contrast, would primarily devastate the loyal WCW fanbase, but it still provides a huge hook. The side of Sting, the face of WCW in the black and white alongside the outsiders, would be must-see TV. It also frees Hogan to remain the red and yellow hero fighting against the invaders. As great as all this sounds, there are tough questions and potential pitfalls. Would fans accept Sting as a villain? In 1996, Sting was deeply loved. Turning him heel would risk alienating the audience, and there's maybe much more value in keeping Sting a good guy. There's also the issue of Hulk Hogan politics. Brother, if Hogan remained a face in this scenario, how long would he tolerate being upstaged by Sting's new villainy? A babyface Hogan might have undermined a Sting-led nWo behind the scenes, creative control and all that, so the nWo going up against Hulk Hogan could turn into another Hogan vs Dungeon of Doom scenario. Also, would Sting joining the nWo have the same crossover appeal? Would it grab wrestling headlines in the same manner that Hogan did? So many questions, but one thing is for sure, the risk is great. Babyface Sting's a cornerstone of WCW programming. Do you really want to jeopardize that? Fans were already starting to boo Hogan, so there was maybe more to gain by turning the Hulkster in comparison to the Stinger. So, Starrcade 1997, Eric Bischoff defeats Larry Zbyszko and the nWo gain control of Nitro. On Monday nights we get nWo Nitro, on Thursday nights we get WCW Thunder, a new show that was set to debut right after Starrcade. It's a complete brand split long before SmackDown and Raw. Each show has its own roster, champions and presentation style. We've got Bischoff calling the shots on Nitro while JJ Dillon serves as Thunder's Law and Order. Occasional supercards or cross-brand matches could occur, but generally the two sides are separate entities waging a war for ratings and supremacy. Essentially, it's WCW versus nWo as competing promotions, one rebellious and renegade, the other proud and traditional. Firstly, everything was already in place for this to actually happen. The Thursday night TBS slot was secured, the rosters for both WCW and nWo were huge, and there was still a lot of interest in seeing the New World Order. In reality, Eric Bischoff wasn't keen on creating another show, but with Nitro being a strict nWo show and Thunder being a very strict WCW show, there was an opportunity to present both broadcasts as something totally different. Absolute unhinged chaos on Monday nights and more traditional WCW programming on Thursdays, so you're catering to two different breeds of wrestling fans. All you need to do is look at the test run just before Starrcade 97 to see why nWo Nitro didn't have legs. A kinda pilot episode overtook the second half of Nitro on December 22nd and it wasn't good. Fans tuned out and the whole idea was deemed a failure, so that pretty much squashes the concept for good. There are other things to consider too. I mean, would Turner executives really sign off on changing WCW's flagship Monday night show? Did Eric Bischoff really have that kind of stroke? Then you have to consider the nWo roster. I mean, sure, the group had big names, but they had more mid-card and lower mid-card members than true main eventers. Do you really want to see guys like Vincent competing every Monday night? And remember, they'd be competing against WWF Raw. And then comes the politics behind it. Do the guys on Thunder begin resenting the guys competing on Monday nights? If WCW could have executed it right, it would have been a masterstroke. Two separate brands competing against each other, while in the background, those two separate brands are also competing against the WWF in the ratings war. But it didn't work out that way. Imagine Bret Hart, the hottest free agent of 1997, coming into the company and he immediately gets elevated as the new leader of the New World Order. Sting defeats Hogan at Starrcade. Hall, Nash and company are embarrassed that Hulk lost the biggest WCW vs nWo showdown the promotion had produced, and so they kick Hulk out of the group and they invite Bret Hart to become their new leader. Bret, still bitter over his WWF exit, stuns everyone by accepting, and a much needed new era begins for the New World Order. Bret proved how good he could work as a heel during his 1997 run in the WWF, and by having him lead the nWo, he gets a chance to continue that heel run at the very top level. WCW gets a fresh main eventer, he can put on better matches than Hulk, and so the doors are wide open to start fresh while continuing the nWo storyline, which was just about to get a little stale. Hogan being kicked out of the group is some real poetic justice. It would likely make him go back to being a babyface. So you've got your natural Bret Hart vs Hulk Hogan matches and Bret Hart vs Sting matches right from the get-go. Done well, this could have extended the nWo shelf life by giving it a second chapter, while also elevating Bret Hart as a top WCW heel. Okay, so Bret arrived at WCW as a hero. He was wronged by Vince McMahon, so maybe there was more value in keeping him a babyface. Also, like it or not, Hollywood Hulk Hogan morphed into a fantastic heel character, and when talking about overall charisma and the styling of the New World Order, many would consider heel Hogan a much better fit than Bret Hart. You've also got the same issue we talked about earlier. If a heel Bret Hart's going up against the babyface Hogan, would Hulk actually put him over in order to elevate Hart as the nWo's new leader? Other things to consider are Bret Hart's nWo 2000 run, where he did serve as leader, but it didn't turn out too well. There's the fact that many fans would rather have seen Bret go up against the nWo rather than join the group. And then you gotta wonder if Bret could have been bothered with all the politicking within the nWo, especially from guys like Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. In the spring of 1998, the nWo split into two factions, nWo Hollywood, led by Hogan, and the nWo Wolfpac, the breakaway group in red and black initially led by Kevin Nash and Randy Savage. This was an exciting development, essentially turning certain nWo members into fan-favourite cool babyfaces against Hogan's villainous crew. The untapped storyline here is to fully capitalise on this split by building to a winner-takes-all showdown between the two nWo factions, a decisive civil war that would conclude the nWo saga in epic fashion rather than the muddled reunion we saw after the finger poke of doom. Instead of eventually merging back together in a swerve, the nWo war continues to intensify. Each side recruits new members. There's betrayals on both sides until finally the storyline peaks at a major pay-per-view. The Wolfpac and Hollywood factions factions battle in a massive elimination match, or maybe even war games, with the stipulation being that the losing faction must disband or merge under the winner's leadership. In this scenario, fans would be treated to the climactic fight between Hogan and Nash with a clear resolution. One nWo faction wins and effectively ends the other for good. Alright, why it works. The nWo Wolfpac was immensely popular. Fans loved the red and black, and folks felt they could cheer for an nWo faction without feeling guilt. Cool theme music, hot merchandise, massive pops, but maybe most importantly, the Wolfpac breathed new life into the nWo branding, which was at risk of going stale in 1998. The Wolfpac was a great idea, but in reality, we never got to see a full-on Wolfpac vs Hollywood war play out in form of an actual wrestling match. The closest we got was a battle royal at Road Wild 98, which was won by Goldberg, so yeah, that tells you all you need to know. A civil war that ends decisively could have been the grand finale the nWo angle needed. It's a bit more nuanced than simply WCW winning over the nWo, and certainly better than the fizzled out mess we ended up getting. We'd get to see one nWo faction implode, making the eventual dissolution more dramatic. Fans in 1998 were into the Wolfpac. They were arguably as popular as Goldberg at certain points, especially among younger fans. Leveraging that to have them win the war would send the crowd home happy. It's a giant payoff that WCW never realised. Okay, well, if it's such a good idea, why didn't it happen? We could point to Hulk Hogan's control in politicking. It was reported that Hogan wasn't happy with how the Wolfpac were outshining him, and this is what ultimately led to the nWo Elite being formed. So I really can't imagine Hulk laying down for a decisive end to the black and white. Consider this too. The Wolfpac was cool because it was an alternative nWo. If the Wolfpac wins this nWo civil war, then there is no alternative. Wolfpac becomes the one and only nWo, and with that, do they lose their cool factor and we just do a rerun of the old nWo? The outcome of the finger poke of doom was essentially a reunited nWo, the Wolfpac and the black and white acting as one. The outcome of the Wolfpac vs black and white civil war would likely lead to the exact same scenario, and therefore things would potentially still take a downturn in 1999. So would it really all be worth it? It is interesting to think about. WCW didn't strike while the iron was hot when it came to the nWo Wolfpac. It's fun to speculate how things could have played out. The Four Horsemen, WCW royalty. Unfortunately, when the nWo came along, it felt like the Horsemen didn't have a place anymore, even though they fought against the group during the early days of the storyline. The pitch goes like this: the nWo embarrassed the Horsemen after Curt Hennig joined the group. Flair returns just like he did in the summer of 1998, but what's different this time around is that the Four Horsemen actually have a plan and they're a threat to the nWo's dominance. Flair forms a new Horseman group, maybe Flair, Benoit, Malenko, and sorry Steve McMichael, but let's try someone else, maybe DDP. The Horsemen begin at the bottom, taking out the lower members of the nWo and forcing them to leave the group. There's only 4 members of the nWo remaining against the Horsemen, and it culminates in a match where the losers must disband for good. The Horsemen, learning from past mistakes, triumph, and finally a bloodied Ric Flair gets to stand tall over a beaten Hollywood Hogan. Essentially, this storyline sees tradition overcome the nWo. The old guard of WCW who were pushed aside roar back to remind everyone who runs the place. During the Nitro era, WCW still had many long-time fans, and many of these long-time fans felt the company's new direction under Bischoff and Hogan simply wasn't good. WCW fans liked tradition, they didn't like the New York guys showing up and ruining their shows. So having tradition being the driving force behind the Horsemen vs NWO war would resonate with those who stayed loyal to World Championship Wrestling. The Horsemen vs NWO could have represented a clash of wrestling cultures, Southern style tradition-rich wrestling versus the chaotic and often overcooked style of the New World Order, and indeed the WWF. From a storyline perspective, the Horsemen also deserved some revenge against the NWO. The faction made a mockery out of Arn Anderson, Bischoff legitimately suspended Ric Flair, Benoit and Malenko were held back due to the NWO taking up precious TV time, so you had everything in place here for good to triumph over evil. Well, you gotta ask yourself, really, if you'd be happy with the Horsemen essentially replacing the nWo as WCW's main villainous faction moving forward. In 1998, the Horsemen were absolutely nowhere near their peak, and I'm not entirely sure if fans could really be convinced that Flair, Benoit, Malenko, and even help from one other main event star could really take down the nWo. Pro wrestling in itself was also moving away from tradition. The WWF had done wonders by bucking tradition, and pro wrestling itself was flourishing due to new, younger fans checking out shows for the very first time. So maybe having the Horsemen defeat the nWo would be a step backwards. Was Hulk Hogan gonna play ball? Would Nash and Hall really bumped all around the ring for guys who Nash famously called vanilla midgets? Could Benoit and Malenko actually convince fans that they belonged in these kind of matches? Maybe the Horsemen getting revenge would be best suited as a chapter of the nWo storyline and not as the demise of the entire faction. The nWo wanted to take over everything related to WCW, but when you really think about it, they never accomplished their mission. Of course, it would have been silly to have the nWo just take over WCW because there'd be no good guys to fight the bad guys unless we do something like nWo Nitro and WCW Thunder as mentioned earlier. But a total takeover of the entire company was never going to happen. It actually doesn't make any sense. What the nWo could have done though, and this is very simple yet highly effective in my opinion, is a complete clean sweep of every single WCW championship belt. On an episode of Nitro, after JJ Dillon outsmarts Eric Bischoff, Eric could announce that the nWo are going to do things the right way. They're going to show their dominance by claiming every single belt WCW has to offer, and therefore WCW have to admit that the nWo was better than them. The faction came close to actually achieving this. Hall and Nash were tag champions, Hulk was the world champ, and Syxx was the cruiserweight champion. You also had Kurt Hennig briefly holding the US title, and Scotty Steiner held the TV title, but the nWo never held every single belt at the same time. So effectively, we have a Gold Rush storyline. nWo members in tag, cruiserweight, mid-card and main event scenes all having the same goal. You get crossovers here with all the divisions, more unity within WCW to try to hold on to the belts, though eventually it ends with the nWo winning everything, and you now have a few months booked in advance featuring WCW guys trying to win the belts back. Again, it's simple and it's not as bombastic as previous ideas, but the nWo Gold Rush could have gave the faction purpose, and believe me, the nWo needed purpose. Unfortunately, the vast majority of the nWo storyline was centered around Hulk Hogan and the World Belt. We did get other stories such as the Outsiders defending the tag belts and Syxx becoming a belt thief, but as time went on, the nWo just seemed to show up to attack babyfaces and every week became the same thing over and over again. With a side quest like this, there's reason for the nWo to go after other guys. There's reasons for WCW to fight against the nWo and not just for company pride. And it provides a much better framework than simply winging WCW versus nWo. There's an added reason behind the war. It is pro wrestling after all, title belts should matter. They're symbols of success and therefore they should, in a perfect world, raise the stakes for any given match. By doing this, we also raise the prestige of the TV and Cruiserweight titles, and after the nWo win the gold, the prestige rises again when WCW guys win them back. There's going to be a time period when the nWo holds every belt, and at that point you have the issue of maintaining credibility. You don't want to accidentally devalue those belts by having, say, Bryan Adams holding on to the TV title for more than a few months. If the nWo holds every belt, you also have every belt being held by a bad guy, so match dynamics might become a bit stale. It's always face versus heel, and there's not much room for face or heel turns if you want to keep belt feuds going on for a month or two. Focusing on nothing but belts also takes away personal grudges, like you're substituting more nuanced storytelling for something that could be perceived as a bit basic. Think about, for example, the Macho Man vs DDP storyline and the matches they had. Those were all fantastic and well remembered, but not a single one of those matches featured a championship belt. Do we sacrifice the possibility of great feuds for the sake of one encompassing storyline centered around gold belts? WCW did not present an endgame to the Goldberg vs nWo rivalry. As a matter of fact, it was all a bit of a mess. Goldberg defeated Hogan for the world title on Nitro. He then lost the world title to Kevin Nash at Starrcade 98. The nWo Elite was formed, which, according to Kevin Nash and Eric Bischoff, was supposed to feature Goldberg getting his revenge and was supposed to lead to Goldberg vs Hogan one more time, but Hulk got injured and plans changed. You then had nWo 2000 screwing Bill over, which was also supposed to lead to Goldberg getting revenge, but both Bill and Bret Hart got injured and the storyline ended prematurely. So Bill Goldberg, the great hope of WCW, never got to pay the New World Order back for all the wrong they did. This scenario sees Goldberg completely steamrolled through the faction in a high-stakes finale, and it goes like this. Take away Goldberg's win over Hogan for the world belt and forget about the Kevin Nash fiasco at Starrcade 98. Goldberg's beginning his win streak, and while the nWo pay attention, they don't act immediately because they know Billy Boy will lose the moment he steps up to the faction's finest. Lower nWo members take losses as Goldberg's streak rages on. The nWo then start throwing bigger names at Bill, including, Buff Bagwell, Conan, and Scotty Steiner. And Hogan grows increasingly concerned as his guys are not getting the job done. The big boys then step up to the plate. Both Kevin Nash and Scott Hall get taken down by Goldberg, and that means all that's left for Bill is Hollywood Hogan in the WCW Championship. The match doesn't happen immediately. Instead, it gets drawn out and we get Hogan manipulating guys like Sting, Luger, and the Giant to also face Goldberg. But when all options have dried up and Hogan's now fearing for his life, JJ Dillon makes it official. Goldberg's defeated everyone and he'll now get a chance to face Hogan for the world belt at a big show, say Starrcade 98. The nWo, desperate not to let Goldberg succeed, stacks the deck, maybe making it an ODQ so the entire nWo can interfere, or let's even say the Wolfpac exists. Hogan might even reconcile with Nash temporarily just to unite the nWo for this threat. Yeah, just tossing stuff out here. The match itself's built up as the destruction of Hogan, and Hulk's doing absolutely everything to try and save himself from disaster, so the intrigue comes in seeing if Hogan's plan works. The match itself turns into a gauntlet of sorts, Goldberg having to destroy everyone before he can get his hands on Hogan. Goldberg spends a lot of his time fighting off the nWo, and even with help from Sting and other members of the WCW roster, he's real tired by the time the Hogan match actually happens. In the end, Goldberg still wins, spear, jackhammer, completely overcoming the odds. The nWo's been defeated once and for all after Goldberg essentially goes through a boss rush to face Hulk. Goldberg's meteoric rise was one of WCW's most organic and exciting developments. No matter what the internet tries to tell you today, he had genuine, real momentum and fan support unlike anyone else in WCW, bar Sting. Marrying that with the nWo storyline makes sense. He's the homegrown WCW monster who could believably work through the entire nWo just to get his hands on Hogan. We borrow a lot here from the Sting vs Hogan build-up for Starrcade 97, but it's important that Bill and Hogan don't even touch each other until their main event confrontation at the pay-per-view. So we're throwing up all these roadblocks both during the storyline itself and the match itself to create excitement. Fans are desperate to see these two fight each other by the time the match happens. The scenario also leverages the streak storyline perfectly, keep it intact until the biggest show, and then it can finally intersect with the world title story that was primarily nWo dominated. Another benefit, it avoids the controversial booking that did actually happen around Starrcade, such as the finger poke of doom, which fans widely consider a factor in WCW's decline. The main issue is the same issue we always bring up when discussing Goldberg's win streak. When does it end? Where does it end? It's an overused term, but it really is booking yourself into a corner. If Goldberg just dominated the whole roster, then where does he go from here? How does he drop the belt in a manner that doesn't feature something silly like a kettle prod? If we get more specific about this Goldberg vs Hogan scenario at Starrcade, we're also asking fans to be very patient and disciplined while waiting for Goldberg to run through the entire nWo. Fans already went through all that in 1997 when Sting was going after Hogan, so many might get bored while also thinking WCW had run out of ideas. That being said though, fans went insane when Goldberg showed up to wreck his opponents, so it might have been fine as long as Goldberg was kept somewhat active on TV. Another concern, would Goldberg really be ready to carry the company after such a monumental win? If you give him that crowning moment, can he really follow up with engaging feuds and promos? Some say Goldberg was limited as a top guy beyond the streak mystique, and honestly, his real World Championship reign in 1998 didn't include a whole lot of matches. His title reign was actually very forgettable, except for the night he won the gold and the night he lost the gold. So does going in this direction prove to be a long-term disaster for the company? Who knows, but like everything in this video, it's all hypothetical. Well, there you go, something different today, and I actually enjoyed putting this together. Being my first fantasy booking video though, there were some little things that kinda bugged me when dreaming these scenarios up. Like, I would second guess everything by looking further into the future, or I would say to myself, no, that wouldn't happen because this guy wouldn't do that, or fans wouldn't really accept this as a resolution because it's out of the realm of possibility. You gotta throw hindsight completely out the window when doing these kind of videos, and I'm not sure if it's really for me, to be honest. Like, I could go back and make another entire video on why all these scenarios wouldn't work, or I could come up with alternative ideas for each scenario, but I'm just gonna leave it here and I'm gonna be done with it. Let me know your thoughts, and until then, thank you so much for watching, and please take care.